Can you imagine surviving without a grocery store on every corner? No hundreds of choices, no pricey processed foods, no freezers or snack aisles, just you and your land. Simpler times, right? Or were they? Allow me to guide you through these 25 foods that kept us alive in times before grocery stores existed. Non-perishable staples are the unsung heroes of survival, providing nourishment and reliability when fresh food just isn't an option. Dried beans and legumes might not seem like culinary rock stars, but they were absolute gold for our ancestors. Lentils, chickpeas, and their bean brethren fueled many civilizations. That's because they were easy to grow, easy to store, and packed a nutritional punch that kept people alive when food options were slim. Lentils are one of the world's oldest cultivated crops, dating back to 8000 BC. People were growing lentils before they invented the wheel. Chickpeas were a dietary staple in ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome, proving that even gladiators appreciated a good hummus. The real superpower of dried beans was their shelf life. If kept dry and cool, beans can last for years, sometimes even decades. When you're living in a world without grocery stores or preservatives, having food that doesn't spoil is a game changer. Additionally, beans are incredibly nutrient-dense, high in protein, fiber, and essential minerals like iron and potassium. While they may seem small, beans were, and still are, a giant in human history. Dried grains, wheat, barley, rice, are the quiet heroes of history. They're not flashy. They don't come with a zing of flavor like spices, but they've fed empires. Without grains, civilization might not even exist. I mean, you try building the pyramids or the Great Wall of China on an empty stomach. Wheat and barley were first cultivated around 10,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent. Basically, humanity's first breadbasket. These grains were so revolutionary, they sparked the agricultural revolution. Instead of wandering around looking for food, humans figured out they could grow it, stockpile it, and stay put. That's right. Grains turned us from nomads into settlers. Rice has been holding Asia together for millennia, and even today, it remains the staple food for half the world's population. Dried grains can last for years if stored properly, making them the ultimate backup plan. When harvests were bad or winters were brutal, having sacks of grains stashed away meant survival. So, while grains may seem humble, they built cities, fed armies, and kept humanity going. Native to the Americas, maize or corn was first domesticated around 9,000 years ago in what is now Mexico. And to be honest, corn didn't just survive history, it dominated it. From the mighty Mayans to the resourceful Native American tribes, maize was life because it was versatile, filling, and easy to grow. Corn didn't demand pampering. It thrived in poor soil and harsh climates, producing large harvests. Turn it into cornmeal, and suddenly, you've got food that stores well, travels easily, and lasts for months. Whether baked into cornbread, boiled into porridge, or rolled into tortillas, cornmeal became the cornerstone of survival and culture. Maize was so vital that the Mayans literally worshipped a corn god. And they weren't wrong. Nutritionally, maize is packed with carbs for energy, fiber for digestion, and when paired with beans, it forms a near-perfect protein. When Europeans arrived, they were blown away by this golden crop and quickly took it global. Corn became polenta in Italy, grits in the American South, and countless dishes worldwide. While corn may seem humble today, it's nothing short of legendary. It fed empires, crossed oceans, and still manages to show up in everything from snacks to fuel. Preserved foods are time-tested essentials, expertly crafted to outlast the seasons and keep hunger at bay no matter the circumstances. Salted meat, the original meat preservation hack before freezers were even a dream. Whether it was jerky, salted fish, or cured pork, this method was a game changer for survival because salt is basically nature's food kryptonite. It stops bacteria in their tracks, keeping meat edible for weeks, months, or even years. For our ancestors, this meant protein on demand. No spoilage, no waste, just salty goodness. Salt was so valuable in ancient times, it was literally used as currency. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in salarium, or salt money. Yep, that's where the word salary comes from. And they weren't just munching on jerky for kicks. Salted meat kept armies marching, sailors sailing, and explorers exploring. It was essential for long journeys when fresh food was impossible to keep. Without it, forget discovering new continents. Most ships wouldn't have made it past week 2. Jerky, dried to chewy perfection, came from indigenous peoples of the Americas who used the sun, smoke, and salt to preserve meat. Meanwhile, salted cod became the fish that fed the world, fueling trade routes and diets from Europe to the Caribbean. Long-lasting, portable, and packed with protein, it kept people alive and moving. Pickled vegetables, the crunchy, tangy, fizzy wonders that kept people from starving when fresh food wasn't an option. Cabbage, cucumbers, carrots, basically anything that could fit in a jar and swim in vinegar. Pickling is one of humanity's oldest methods of food preservation, dating back over 4,000 years to ancient Mesopotamia. People knew a simple truth: when life hands you cucumbers, make pickles. The magic of pickling lies in the preservation process. By immersing veggies in brine or vinegar, you create an acidic environment that prevents spoilage. This means you can have fresh, nutrient-rich food in the dead of winter when fresh produce is nowhere to be found. Cabbage, for example, transforms into sauerkraut, a fermented powerhouse full of vitamin C and probiotics, exactly what you need to survive a long winter and fight off scurvy. Pickled cucumbers were a favorite of ancient Egyptians and even made their way into the diet of Julius Caesar's army, who believed they boosted their strength. If pickles are good enough for Roman soldiers, they're definitely good enough for your sandwich. It also added flavor, a burst of acidity and crunch to otherwise bland meals. They kept things fresh, fought off food waste, and gave humans something to bite into when the pantry was bare. Naturally long-lasting foods are nature's built-in survival kit, offering sustenance and durability straight from the source. Root vegetables, those humble, earthy powerhouses that have been keeping people fed for centuries. Potatoes, carrots, turnips. These are the veggies that survived harsh winters, poor soil, and even the occasional hungry bear. They might not have the glamour of leafy greens, but they've got something better: staying power. Did you know that the potato was first domesticated by the Andean people around 8,000 years ago? Fast forward to the 16th century, and they were the food that saved Europe during famines. Potatoes helped Europe avoid starvation, and they didn't even need a passport to do it. Meanwhile, in America, the potato became the crop that fueled the westward expansion. So yeah, potatoes kind of built the country. Did you know carrots weren't always orange? Originally, they came in purple, white, and yellow. The modern orange carrot was developed in the Netherlands in the 17th century as a tribute to the Royal House of Orange. And let's not forget turnips. These underrated root veggies have been a staple for centuries, especially during times of war and scarcity. They're tough, they're hardy, and they can survive in the coldest of conditions. Onions and garlic, two kitchen staples that have been bringing flavor and survival to the table for centuries. These little powerhouses don't just make your meals taste amazing, they've got some serious staying power. Forget the fancy spices. Onions and garlic were the original go-to ingredients for ancient civilizations. Dating back over 5,000 years to ancient Egypt, garlic, besides being a food, was a medicine. Egyptians believed garlic had magical powers, including the ability to ward off evil spirits. Beyond folklore, garlic has some legit health benefits, like boosting immunity and fighting off infections. A little garlic in your stew might just save your life. Onions have been around for even longer. Some records suggest they were cultivated as far back as 3000 BC in Asia and Egypt. Not only were onions used for cooking, but they were also carried as a form of currency. Think about that next time you're chopping one up for a burger. Onions and garlic store like champs. They don't need refrigeration, and they can last for months when kept in a cool, dry place. That makes them the ultimate survival food, flavor that's ready to go no matter the season. Honey, nature's sweet, sticky miracle. While we typically think of honey as just a tasty treat for our toast or tea, it's also been a lifesaver for thousands of years. Honey's a natural preservative, and believe it or not, it can last forever. Archaeologists have found pots of honey in ancient Egyptian tombs, still perfectly edible after 3,000 years. Why is honey so special? Well, its unique combination of low moisture content and natural acidity creates an environment where bacteria and microorganisms can't grow. Essentially, honey is like Mother Nature's own preservative. In ancient times, honey was used to preserve fruits, meat, and even as a wound dressing. While your pantry might not last for 3,000 years, that jar of honey? It's good to go, forever. The ancient Greeks and Romans used honey to sweeten wine, and it even made its way into their medicinal practices. Honey was critical for survival. It was a quick source of energy, easy to store, and never spoiled. Fermented foods are ancient culinary marvels, combining preservation with probiotics to create flavors that stand the test of time and benefit your gut along the way. Sauerkraut was the tangy, crunchy, fermented food that's been keeping people healthy and full for centuries. We're talking about the ultimate survival food. Sauerkraut is made by fermenting cabbage with salt. Simple, effective, and delicious. Don't let its humble ingredients fool you. Sauerkraut is packed with power. It has been around for over 2,000 years, with roots in ancient China. It's believed that the Chinese invented the fermentation process, but the Germans really took it to the next level. During long, cold winters, they turned cabbage into a fermented food that could last for months. Its key benefit is long shelf life, a must in times before refrigeration. Cabbage would sit in barrels, fermenting for months, ready to be eaten when fresh vegetables were hard to come by. The fermentation process packed it full of probiotics, which are great for digestion and boosting your immune system. Sailors on long sea voyages used sauerkraut to fight scurvy, thanks to its high vitamin C content. Whether piled on sausages, mixed in a salad, or just eaten by itself, sauerkraut adds a burst of flavor and history to any dish. Kimchi was the spicy, fermented, downright addictive dish that's been a staple of Korean cuisine for over 2,000 years. Kimchi is much more than just a side dish. It's a nutritional powerhouse and a survival food that kept people nourished during the harshest of times. Made from vegetables like Napa cabbage, radishes, and sometimes even cucumber, kimchi gets its signature flavor from chili pepper, garlic, ginger, and fermented fish sauce. It's bold, it's punchy, and it's the food you didn't know you needed until you tried it. One of its biggest benefits was fermentation. Fermented foods like kimchi are packed with probiotics, which are great for digestion and boosting your immune system. In ancient Korea, kimchi was essential for survival, especially during winter when fresh vegetables weren't available. It could be stored for months, making it a reliable source of vitamins and nutrients. Kimchi was so important to Korean culture that during the Korean War, people would often share it with soldiers to give them a taste of home. And even today, kimchi is often served at every meal in Korea. It's like their version of the American side salad. Not only does it have an incredibly long shelf life when stored properly, but it also helps keep you healthy and adds a spicy kick to whatever you're eating. Who knew that fermented cabbage could be so versatile and life-sustaining? Yogurt and kefir were the dairy delights that have been keeping people's guts happy for centuries. These probiotic-rich foods were essential for survival in many parts of the world, especially in regions with access to dairy. While yogurt and kefir may seem like modern health fads, they're actually ancient foods with deep roots in cultures that knew the power of fermentation long before it became trendy. Yogurt's believed to have originated around 5,000 years ago in Central Asia. It could be stored for long periods and could be made even in non-refrigerated environments. And let's not forget the key benefit: probiotics. These good bacteria not only help with digestion, but they also boost your immune system. It's like a tiny army of friendly microbes fighting off the bad guys in your gut. Kefir, a fermented milk drink, is the cousin of yogurt, but it's a little more intense. Kefir is a powerhouse of probiotics. Some people call it liquid yogurt, and has been used for centuries in Eastern Europe and Russia. Kefir grains, the culture that ferments the milk, can live for generations. Both yogurt and kefir provide long-lasting nutrition, packed with protein, calcium, and probiotics. They could be stored, traveled with, and consumed at any time. Dried foods are lightweight, nutrient-packed essentials, expertly preserved by removing moisture to stand the test of time and travel. Dried fruits, the snack that's been sweetening survival for centuries. Whether it's raisins, apricots, dates, or prunes, dried fruits have been used to fuel adventurers, explorers, and ancient civilizations alike. Why? Because they're portable, durable, and packed with energy. When fresh fruits weren't available, dried fruits were the go-to option. They could last for months, sometimes even years, and were a quick source of sugar and nutrients, essential for keeping up energy during long travels or harsh winters. Raisins are basically just dried grapes, but they're so much more than that. In ancient Egypt, raisins were considered a luxury food, often reserved for the elite and used in sacred offerings. Today, raisins are a classic snack and a key ingredient in everything from oatmeal to baked goods. Did you know raisins have more iron than fresh grapes? Apricots and dates, similarly, have been used for thousands of years as vital food sources. Dates, especially, are known as the bread of the desert because they were the perfect survival food for nomadic tribes in the Middle East, providing quick energy and lasting power. Dried fruits are easy to store, travel with, and can be kept without refrigeration. Dried herbs have been around much longer than you might think. We're talking about staples like thyme, oregano, and basil, which have been essential for both flavor and survival for centuries. In the days before grocery stores had shelves full of prepackaged seasonings, people had to rely on what they could grow, dry, and store. Dried herbs were the ultimate spice lifesavers. Take oregano, for example. It's been used since ancient Greece, where it was believed to be a symbol of happiness and harmony. It was also prized for its medicinal properties. Oregano is rich in antioxidants, making it a great natural defense against illness, an ancient cold remedy that still packs a punch today. Thyme is another gem. This herb was a favorite of ancient Egyptians who used it in embalming and as an offering to the gods. In the Middle Ages, people carried thyme with them as a way to ward off evil spirits. So not only is it great in your spaghetti sauce, but it could also protect you from supernatural forces, which is always a nice bonus. Once dried, these herbs retain their flavor for months, if not years, making them a pantry essential. When fresh herbs were scarce, dried thyme or oregano could instantly elevate a meal and keep people fed, healthy, and even a little bit mystical. Dried mushrooms are the unsung heroes of the pantry. Sure, fresh mushrooms are tasty, but when you dehydrate them, you unlock a whole new level of power, and they become a must-have for survival. For centuries, people have been drying mushrooms like shiitake, porcini, and morel, preserving their rich flavors and essential nutrients for times when fresh fungi weren't available. These little guys can last forever on a shelf. Well, almost. But they certainly outlast fresh mushrooms by a long shot. Dried mushrooms are more flavorful than their fresh counterparts. The drying process concentrates the natural umami, which is why dried mushrooms are often used in soups, stews, and sauces to add that deep, savory kick. They're like the secret ingredient that's been hiding in your pantry, waiting for the perfect moment to shine. Dried mushrooms were essential for ancient cultures. In China, they've been used for over 2,000 years, valued not just for their flavor, but for their medicinal properties. In fact, many types of mushrooms are rich in antioxidants and compounds that can boost the immune system. Dried mushrooms were easy to store, transport, and were a reliable food source during long winters or expeditions. Plus, when you rehydrate them, they taste almost as good as fresh. Foraged and gathered foods connect us to nature's pantry, offering survival staples that sustained humanity long before farming took root. Wild berries, nature's little powerhouses packed with flavor, nutrients, and just a hint of danger. Elderberries, for example, have been used for centuries for both food and medicine. Native Americans, European settlers, and even the ancient Egyptians used elderberries for their antiviral properties. They're rich in antioxidants and vitamin C, which is great for boosting your immune system. Just a subtle warning: don't eat elderberries raw. They can be toxic and make you feel like you've been hit by a bus. But once cooked properly, they're a powerful ally. Cranberries, on the other hand, are well known for their role in preventing urinary tract infections, but they were also a crucial food source for Native American tribes. These tart little berries were often dried and stored for winter, when fresh fruit was a rare luxury. The key benefit of wild berries is their nutrient density and preservation. They packed a punch of vitamins and antioxidants, and by drying or preserving them, people could store them for months. When fresh food was scarce, wild berries were nature's multivitamin, keeping people healthy, energized, and possibly a little more adventurous. Nuts. Small, crunchy, and surprisingly mighty. Whether it's walnuts, almonds, or chestnuts, they were essential for survival long before they became the trendy snack we know today. Nuts didn't just get added to your salad for fun. They were a staple in ancient diets, offering essential nutrition and a major energy boost when times were tough. Take almonds, for instance. They've been around for thousands of years, cultivated by the ancient Egyptians and Greeks. Almonds were such a prized food that they were even found in tombs. High in protein, healthy fats, and vitamins, almonds provided the long-lasting energy needed for tough work or travel. They were like nature's granola bar, before granola was even a thing. Then there's the mighty walnut, known for its brain-like shape, though probably not the reason ancient civilizations valued it. Walnuts are rich in omega-3 fatty acids, making them fantastic for brain health and heart function. They were even used in ancient times as a remedy for ailments. Chestnuts, though often overshadowed by other nuts, were a major survival food in colder climates. These dense, starchy nuts were easy to store and provided a hearty source of energy during long winters. Whether for snacking or as an emergency food source, nuts could be stored for months and were always ready to provide an instant energy boost. Edible seeds, even though small in size, were mighty in nutritional value. Sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds, chia, and flax. All these little powerhouses have been fueling civilizations for centuries. Sunflower seeds have been around for thousands of years. Native Americans used sunflower seeds as a source of food and oil, even grinding them into a paste to use in cooking. Today, we enjoy them as a crunchy snack, but historically, they were a vital source of fat and protein. Then there are pumpkin seeds, also known as pepitas, which were a key food for ancient Mesoamerican civilizations. The Aztecs believed that pumpkin seeds were a powerful medicine. People even used them to treat parasitic infections. Rich in magnesium, zinc, and protein, pumpkin seeds provided essential nutrients for people on the go, especially during long journeys or periods of scarcity. Edible seeds are easy to store, pack, and carry, and a small handful can pack a serious punch of energy and nutrients. Staples from milling and grinding, like flour and meal, transformed humble grains into versatile essentials that fueled civilizations for centuries. Flour, often overlooked yet absolutely essential. Ground from wheat or other grains, flour is the building block of some of our favorite foods, from bread to pancakes to cookies. Before we started grabbing bags of flour off supermarket shelves, people had to get creative with their grain grinding. The history of flour goes way back, with evidence of grinding grains into flour dating as far as 30,000 years ago. Ancient civilizations like the Egyptians and Romans ground wheat by hand using stone mills, and they didn't even have the luxury of a stand mixer to help them out. In fact, the word flour comes from the Latin flaus, meaning flour, referring to the fine quality of the ground grain. Flour was the go-to staple because it could be easily stored, and it had a long shelf life. Whether made from wheat, barley, or even rice, it provided the base for baked goods that could last for weeks. Porridge and gruels have been the cornerstone of survival diets for centuries, providing essential nutrition and comfort during times of scarcity. Made from oats, barley, or cornmeal, porridge was the original meal in a bowl, long before fancy breakfast bowls became Instagram famous. Oats have been cultivated for over 2,000 years, with the first evidence of oat porridge appearing in ancient civilizations like the Romans. Oats were easy to grow and could be stored for months, making them a reliable food source, especially during harsh winters. They were the ultimate comfort food, cheap, filling, and hearty. the humble porridge wasn't just for breakfast either. Gruels, which are similar to porridge but thinner, were often served as a simple, nutritious meal for both the sick and the elderly. Porridge was thought to have healing powers. In medieval Europe, people believed that eating porridge could improve digestion, boost energy, and even protect against disease. Turns out, Grandma was right all along. Packed with fiber and carbohydrates, they provided lasting energy to keep people going throughout their day. And also, they could be made with whatever grains were available. When fresh food was in short supply, porridge was always there to nourish and comfort. Proof that sometimes the simplest foods are the most powerful. Oils and fats are calorie-dense powerhouses, vital for cooking, preserving, and providing long-lasting energy throughout history. Lard and tallow were two foods that have been around as long as, well, cooking itself. While today we might shy away from animal fats in favor of olive oil or avocado toast, lard and tallow were once the essential cooking fats that kept our ancestors nourished and their dishes delicious. First off, lard comes from pigs, while tallow is derived from cattle or sheep. Both were prized for their ability to provide long-lasting energy. These fats were a major source of calories in pre-grocery store days, when food was often hard to come by. In the 18th and 19th centuries, tallow candles were the primary source of light, long before electricity. These fats were easy to store, had a long shelf life, and could be used in so many ways. They kept people fueled during tough times, providing essential fat and flavor. Olive oil, also known as liquid gold, the crown jewel of the Mediterranean diet, and the secret behind why Mediterranean cuisine tastes so good. Olive oil has been a staple in Mediterranean regions for thousands of years, and for good reason. It's not just tasty, it's downright essential. Olive trees have been cultivated for over 6,000 years, with the ancient Greeks and Romans using them for everything from cooking to religious ceremonies to skincare. Not to mention, olive oil was once used as a currency in some parts of the Mediterranean, because when you have a commodity that's good for everything from sautéing to healing cuts, you're sitting on a treasure. One of the key benefits of olive oil is its heart-healthy properties. Packed with monounsaturated fats, it can help lower bad cholesterol and reduce the risk of heart disease. The Mediterranean diet, which is rich in olive oil, has been linked to longer lifespans and a lower incidence of chronic diseases. So, not only does it make your pasta taste like $1,000,000, it might also add a few more years to your life. Who knew that drizzling some oil on your salad could be a form of self-care? Medicinal and survival foods blur the line between nourishment and healing, offering life-sustaining benefits when survival is on the line. Herbal teas should be your go-to for relaxation, digestion, and maybe even a little life wisdom. But did you know that these calming brews were once essential for survival? Long before tea bags and fancy tea lattes, herbal teas made from dried leaves like mint, chamomile, or sage were vital in cultures around the world. Mint has been used for thousands of years, dating back to ancient Egypt, where it was known for its soothing properties. People would sip mint tea to help with everything from nausea to headaches. Chamomile is another herbal hero. Its calming effects have made it a favorite for winding down after a long day. Chamomile was also used to treat a variety of ailments like indigestion, anxiety, and even skin irritations. A cup of chamomile tea was like your own personal first aid kit in a mug. Beyond being soothing, herbal teas could help with a range of health issues and were easy to store. These natural remedies were a simple yet essential way to keep ailments at bay. Pemmican sound like something you'd find on a survivalist's grocery list, right? But this ancient food was a total game changer for explorers, trappers, and indigenous peoples of North America. Made by mixing dried meat, fat, and berries, pemmican was the ultimate survival food. Compact, nutritious, and able to withstand the test of time. The key to pemmican's longevity was the generous use of fat, which helped preserve the dried meat and berries. Think of it as nature's version of a protein bar, just way more hardcore. Indigenous tribes, particularly the Plains tribes like the Sioux and Assiniboine, developed pemmican for long journeys and harsh winters. It was high in protein, fat, and essential nutrients, making it perfect for surviving those long, cold months when fresh food was scarce. Pemmican was so portable and energy-packed that it became a favorite among explorers like Lewis and Clark. They carried it during their famous expedition, knowing it would keep them fueled even in the most remote wilderness. It's the original on-the-go meal, packed with the fats, proteins, and vitamins needed to sustain you through a tough journey. Baked goods that last are the perfect blend of convenience and longevity, providing comforting sustenance that can endure tough conditions while offering a taste of home. Hardtack was a food so tough, it makes your grandmother's fruitcake look like a soft pillow. This simple, durable bread was a crucial survival food for soldiers, sailors, and pioneers during the 18th and 19th centuries. Made from just flour, water, and salt, hardtack was baked to a rock-like consistency, making it virtually indestructible. You could throw it in your backpack, toss it in the ocean, or even leave it under a rock for a month, and it would still be good to go. Kind of like a prehistoric granola bar, if you don't mind chewing through a few layers of toughness. The reason for its toughness? Hardtack needed to withstand long journeys. Whether on a military campaign, a sea voyage, or an overland trek, people needed a food that wouldn't spoil, attract pests, or collapse under pressure. Still, don't expect gourmet flavor. Let's just say it wasn't winning any Michelin stars anytime soon. With a shelf life that could last for months or even years, hardtack was the perfect food for surviving harsh conditions. Biscuits and crackers, your pantry staples that go from snack time to survival food without missing a beat. These crispy treats have been a game changer for centuries, offering both convenience and longevity. While today they're often enjoyed with cheese or jam, back in the day, biscuits and crackers were essential for survival, thanks to their long shelf life and portability. Take the humble hardtack cracker, for example. Used by soldiers during the Civil War, these crackers were baked until they were dry enough to survive the toughest conditions. Biscuits and crackers were never just about being dry and durable. They provided a valuable source of carbohydrates to keep energy levels up when fresh food was scarce. Let's start with a Dust Bowl classic, canned tumbleweed leaves. So, the Dust Bowl was one of the worst agriculture disasters the United States has ever seen, and almost no crops grew. But even in these tough times, weeds like lamb's quarters and tumbleweeds continued to thrive. Families had no choice but to add this plant to their plates. Think of it as the broccoli of the 1930s. Kids weren't big fans of this meal option, but it did provide a good amount of fiber, minerals, and vitamins. Tumbleweed leaves were added to all kinds of different stews and soups. They might have not been the most glamorous ingredient on the shelf, but they got the job done by providing nutrients and keeping tummies full. Hoover Stew was one of those dishes that anyone could afford to make, so it is no wonder that the stew was a common item in the Great Depression. Hoover Stew had two signature traits. It could feed the whole family, and you could have the dish without exceeding the monthly budget. As for the recipe, the dish involved using scraps and leftovers to increase savings and recycling in a time when households could not afford a lot. You did not need many spices, and you could easily use leftover meats. In an America where banks were going bankrupt and the job market was hopeless, the stew was a welcome addition. Obviously, it would be a popular choice among many households, as our older viewers might still remember. Fortunately, as economic stability came back, Hoover Stew went away from tables in favor of more flavorful and varied stews. Chicory Root, the Great Depression's favorite coffee substitute, was every house's pantry staple. This unassuming plant was dug up, roasted, and ground into a powder, becoming the secret weapon for caffeine cravings when actual coffee beans were out of the question. It wasn't a new idea. Chicory coffee had been used in Europe for years, but the Depression brought it into the American home. The root gave brews a slightly nutty, earthy flavor, and some people said it made their coffee taste richer. But others weren't so sure, saying it tasted like burnt wood. It was cheap, caffeine-free, and most importantly, available. Chicory was often harvested by families themselves, pulling roots from ditches and fields to stretch their dwindling budgets. What was once a pesky weed became a pantry essential through a little ingenuity. Chicory coffee, as it turns out, has lasted and is still a regional favorite in places like New Orleans, where it's served with beignets for a taste of Southern charm. Chicory Root was a lifeline during the Great Depression, but it's now an optional indulgence. That was before fancy cafe culture. It was about finding comfort in a cup when life wasn't dominating the streets of New York, Chicago, St. Louis, and other cities that became hubs for industrialization and commerce were convenient snacks like the classic Vienna sausage. This comes all the way from Austria, but it's something that found a home in the daily lunches of so many Americans. The best part about this was that they were these pre-canned sausages that were fresh. They were frozen, so they were cold, but they could be eaten right out of the can. You didn't need to do anything with it, so the need for a microwave was completely non-existent. A lot of people rely on the defrost mode on theirs today to get their daily sausage fill, but Vietnamese sausages didn't need you to do anything but peel off the can. They were really easy for sausage-based dishes because you didn't have to do the hours-long process of making one from scratch. If you really wanted them hot, you could just get the stove going and you would have warm sausages perfectly fit for eating. No microwave or electricity needed. When you think of popcorn, the Dust Bowl era is probably the last thing that comes to mind. Popcorn is the comfort food of the movie theaters, but believe it or not, they were still all the rage back in the 30s when options were limited. During the Dust Bowl, these crunchy snacks took on a whole new role. Yes, they paired popcorn with milk back then, and it became the combo of our dreams. When milk was available, it was poured over freshly popped popcorn to turn the snack into a whole meal. Milk was scarce, so it wasn't always available, but when it was, this meal was everyone's go-to. Popcorn was a cheap and easily accessible grain, and milk, if you were lucky enough to have some, added a bit of protein and calcium. It might not be your first choice for a fancy dinner, but it was a clever way to make do with what was available. Mock apple pie is another delicious dessert that clicked with masses across the nations during rough times. As apples were getting expensive, people were looking for cheaper alternatives. That is when the mock apple pie entered. Resemblance is one thing, but if the pie looks and tastes like it, then it might as well be an apple pie. Created using cheap and the nation-favorite Ritz crackers, mixing those with some vanilla syrup, sprinkle some lemon and cinnamon to create a perfect home-baked pie fit to rival apple pie. The Depression era onwards really saw an explosion in its popularity. We cannot really blame people either. Fresh, juicy apples were in hot demand and short supply. The pie was just as cheap as Hoover Stew and easy to make. Nowadays, of course, you would not find this in houses you go to, despite it being popular enough that Ritz had instructions on the back of the box on how to make it. The magic of salt pork was always something you could count on during the Great Depression. This heavily salted slab of fatty meat was a lifeline for families trying to stretch meals to infinity and beyond. Refrigeration was a luxury for many, and salt pork's long shelf life made it an indispensable pantry item. Salt pork wasn't just a food. It was an ingredient, a seasoning, and sometimes a main course. It flavored beans, greens, and soups, enough to give even the simplest dishes a little indulgence. When we were leaner, we'd fry up a small piece of salt pork and use the rendered fat to cook everything else. The result? A meal that had the feel of more meat than it actually had. However, it wasn't all plain sailing. The salt pork was so salty that it often had to be soaked or boiled before eating. It was affordable, versatile, and practically indestructible, a trifecta of survival during tough times. Salt pork is much more likely to appear in gourmet kitchens than in emergency pantries today. But back then it was a salty superhero, rescuing countless Depression-era meals from bland oblivion. You might have come here expecting a meal that could make you completely filled. That's why I want you to meet the ground beef Wellington, which is a pretty nifty little rendition of a classic. Sausages don't really set the bar too high. They make for a pretty good snack, and in some cases, with a bit of creativity, even a pretty good meal. A main course would be something that could fill you up and have you walk away feeling like you're completely full. Now, back in the days before 1945, which is when the microwave was patented, making a puff pastry was a real pain in the neck. You could try, and a lot of people would, but it was something you needed a good reason for. Not at all something you'd rely on for a quick meal to wash away the hunger. That's where ground beef came in, and man, this was a national win for boomers. The thing is, it was a much cheaper and less labor-intensive way to make it, and before this, Wellington was mostly something expensive that only the rich got often. The best part was that it was something that just needed an oven, and the beef itself was something you could sear up in on your stove. You didn't need anything like a microwave or any kind of fancy pastry-making skills. After all, quick, tasty, and easy is the American way. Speaking of food combinations, this next one will definitely blow your mind. Have you ever thought of combining beef with gelatin? If not, this is your sign to twist things up a bit and try this one out. There's a reason why this one was the talk of the town during the Dirty 30s. The gelatin was used to thicken soups and stews, while the beef added a hint of protein. Now, since the supply was always limited, don't expect a whole beef steak in your bowl. Just a few chopped up bits and pieces of meat and every few bites was all you got. This meal was designed to be full, and it was left bland for the most part. However, some people in the South decided to spice things up a bit by remixing the recipe according to their likes. One such recipe included canned corned beef, canned peas, gelatin, lemon juice, and vinegar. We wouldn't consider pairing these ingredients today, but it was a lifesaver for those who had to make it through the hard times. Then came the cornmeal mush, joining pies and stews on the list of economically sensible lunches. When times are tough, porridges become a very enticing meal, as affording bacon strips or other meats for breakfast was out of the question. Even if you got cheap beef jerky, you did not know if it was good and clean meat, and typical American breakfasts like grilled bacon and eggs were losing popularity due to price constraints. People needed their 7 a.m. nutrition, so cornmeal mush, an incredibly healthy dish, became popular. Topping the cornmeal with maple syrup, or in some cases a thick sausage gravy, elevated it in the taste department. It was not much of a fan favorite though, because the mush did not last long after the economy settled. Once people could afford better, they definitely went back to their regulars. Carrot marmalade came to the rescue when gelatin and popcorn weren't doing much for the taste buds. Now, marmalade usually involves citrus fruits, but during the Dust Bowl, folks had to get creative. This was a pairing that ensured nothing went to waste in the kitchen, including carrots that had slightly gone bad. This wasn't just a treat, but it was a way to preserve the sweetness in fresh fruits and vegetables because fresh produce was hard to come by. This marmalade was made by boiling carrots with sugar and a bit of lemon juice, creating a spread that could be used on bread or biscuits. Plus, carrots are packed with nutrition. Carrots are packed with antioxidants like beta-carotene and lutein. These compounds have protective effects against oxidative stress and inflammation. Dandelion salad might sound like a fairy tale-like name for an incredibly frugal but delicious meal. By now, you might have noticed the scavenger vibe in terms of ingredients of the dishes so far. People making anything out of whatever they had on hand. Economic downturns often feature lifestyle changes, and the Great Depression was no other, sending people on a scramble to find and eat anything. Dandelion salad took scramble seriously, as the meal involved finding and foraging dandelions. You would cut out all the roots, flowers, and waste to make the dressing for a very healthy salad. For people, especially those on a diet and a budget, this was a godsend. For a garnish, all people would usually put on it was lemon juice and olive oil. A dash of salt, and you were good to go at basically no cost. Hominy was a humble kitchen staple during the Great Depression, and it stretched far and wide. Hominy puffed up into soft, chewy nuggets made by soaking dried corn kernels in lye. Yes, lye, and as versatile as they were filling. Hominy may not have been glamorous, but it did the job. Hominy made its way into soups, casseroles, and even as a side dish fried. A texture party, it gave simple meals a satisfying chew. It became the base for Southern favorites like grits for those who could afford a little extra seasoning. It was a hearty, starchy savior on lean days for everyone else. Hominy was often prepared in large batches, which they dried and stored for future use. This wasn't just food, it was an investment for the long term, so you wouldn't go hungry. Making hominy wasn't exactly convenient, but it was worth it when food supplies were low. Hominy is still a staple in some cuisines, but it's long since faded from everyday American tables. But for those who lived through the Great Depression, this unassuming corn product was a lifeline. And once again, necessity is the mother of culinary invention. The The whole need for convenient food without convenience tools like microwaves inspired things like wraps and deli food. One pretty popular and healthy choice was the avocado Caprese wrap. It was kind of the boomer equivalent to a street-side shawarma back then. The whole thing was a 15-minute affair that used ingredients that were already prepared, and in places like California, most vendors really built up their speed over the long workdays. You had wraps available to you in as little as 5 minutes on a good day. And forget the microwave, this time you didn't even need any kind of stove. No cooking, heating, nothing to do with fire or knives involved. All you had to do was either assemble things yourself, which was just basic stuff like basil, cheese, and avocados, or wait for any of the many street sellers. And trust me, there wasn't a street in big cities that didn't have a designated wrap guy. Now people who had chickens as pets had the luxury of eating hard-boiled eggs for breakfast. Let's be honest, we all love a sunny side-up, but hard-boiled eggs just hit differently. This classic breakfast food got a workout during the Dust Bowl. Eggs were a valuable source of protein and could be stored for a longer time. Eggs, when hard-boiled, had a longer shelf life compared to raw eggs. This made them a practical choice for preservation, as they could be stored and used over time without spoiling quickly. Plus, boiling eggs is easy no matter how challenging the times get. They could be sliced into salads, added to casseroles, or simply enjoyed as a snack. These weren't just a breakfast item. These eggs were also used in dinner meals and were often served with white sauce over rice. If you ask, vinegar pie is the rather odd dish on this list that proves that at times of desperation, anyone will eat anything. Vinegar pie started spreading infectiously out of states like Pennsylvania in the start of the 1930s and tops even Dandelion Salad when it comes to being budget-friendly. All you would need is an open crust, vinegar, sugar, and some eggs to create this unique pie. To cover the mediocre taste, people would coat the crust with a meringue. It was an affectionate treat to bring in case of a celebration and was easy to make if you had a sweet craving. The dish was also pretty delicious if you were able to get over the sour vinegar taste and focus on the meringue. People really wanted a sweet treat at the end of a hard week spent cutting corners and working long hours, and small joys like vinegar pies were what kept people sustained. Before the age of nationwide Subway, we had things like the Philly-style Italian hoagie. Honestly, you could ask your dad or mom or even your grandparents about this, and they'd probably tell you everything you need to know, like a walking hoagie encyclopedia. It was just the thing to eat back in their day, and just like the dish Caprese wrap, let's just say it was the first thing in people's heads when their stomach started growling. Depending on the preparation, you could be looking at 20 minutes. But if you were really in the rhythm of making this every day, and most people were, you'd be sitting with a sub in about 10. Nowadays, we rely on microwaves to melt our cheeses, warm our vegetables, defrost our meat, and so much more. Back then, some creative people in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, first had the idea to popularize the hoagie for many reasons. It was something that could fill you up, and it was easy to carry around and eat on the way to work. This is a textbook example of a working-class dish, and it needed absolutely no heat or cooking. Everything was either pre-made or just needed to be cut and assembled, so the time it would take was entirely dependent on how well you knew your way around a knife. Cornbread was one of the most popular sources of carbohydrates back in the day. Since there wasn't much food available, this one was a reliable provider of instant energy and kept folks fueled through the toughest days. Cornbread was versatile too. It could be served with just about anything, from a hearty bean soup to a simple stew. It was the kind of bread that could stand up to the most basic of meals and still make them feel a bit more complete. Plus, it was easy to make in large batches, which was a huge plus when feeding a family when pockets were tight. This was a staple during the Dust Bowl because cornmeal was cheap and filling. You could whip up a simple cornbread loaf, fry up corn fritters, or even make mush. Potato pancakes are one that we are very sad to have seen fade away from the arsenal of home chefs. Pancakes made with matzo or applesauce topped with garlic or fried onions made for such a mouth-watering meal. Low-income households back in those times were struggling to buy produce. Farmers' markets were uniformly unaffordable for middle-income households due to creeping inflation. People needed a vegetable that was cost-appropriate and easy to make in batches. Enter the potato pancake, which revolutionized the breakfast scene in a struggling time. As times improved, people slowly started going to more fancier and creative breakfasts, unfortunately leaving simpler dishes behind. Potato pancakes took a back seat in the face of changing food and economic trends, but anyone from the era will rave to you about the godsend these were. Hardtack, also known as the cracker that could survive the apocalypse, was a Depression-era favorite for those wanting to stockpile something that wouldn't spoil. It was a rock-hard biscuit made of nothing but flour, water, maybe a pinch of salt. Nothing special but dependable. Hardtack was a legacy food, one with military rations and sailor diets pedigree. It was a Depression-era hit because families could stash it in pantries without fear of spoilage. Plain, it was like gnawing on a brick. It was almost edible, but softened with soup, milk, or coffee, it became almost edible. Emphasis on almost. Hardtack was bland, but there was something charming about it. It was cheap, easy to make, and incredibly filling. It was the base for many families' meals when ingredients were scarce. It thickened stews, broken into crumbs, or was an impromptu plate when real dishware wasn't an option, left whole. Today, hardtack is more of a historical curiosity than a pantry must-have. However, during the Great Depression, this humble cracker represented resilience. It wasn't fancy or flavorful, but it kept people going when times were tough, and that's what mattered. In a similar way, but also on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have no Noodle Pad Thai, and I can already hear the disgruntled sighs from the traditionalists among you guys, but hear me out. It's not as blasphemous as you'd think. I know traditionally, you get Pad Thai with enough noodles to satisfy all your cravings, but this time, it relies entirely on fresh produce. See, the reason for that was that the landscape of America's eating habits was entirely different from what we're used to. Fast food hadn't taken off yet, McDonald's didn't have every minor in a chokehold, and Wendy's wasn't the go-to takeout for couples spending a lazy Saturday together. People were still eating zucchini and carrots and being health conscious. Of course, that didn't mean they'd be healthy in a non-American way. Efficiency was still the name of the game, and that's why this no noodle pad Thai recipe took off as well as it did. You can have a bowl of lovely pad Thai with all the flavors you're used to expecting in under 10-20 minutes on a gas flame or a stovetop. If you had some leftovers from the night before, you could just warm it up over a stovetop. It was a pretty refreshing way to go about your lunch. Who doesn't love the aroma of a good homemade casserole? Well, this hearty meal was still winning hearts even during the Dust Bowl days. Now, during the Dust Bowl, casseroles weren't the fancy, cheesy concoctions we know today. They were more like a hodgepodge of whatever was on hand. Leftover vegetables, some mystery meat, maybe some canned beans, all thrown together in a baking dish. Not exactly Instagram-worthy, but it was a way to use up scraps and fill up the dining table. Plus, they were the stars of potlucks and holiday dinners. This was the era of coming up with all different recipes for casseroles and everything from hash brown casseroles to tuna noodle casseroles. These recipes were passed down from generation to generation and made their way to us. Casseroles were the kind of dish that brought people together, not just because they were filling, but because they were often made with love and shared with family and friends. They were a reminder that even in the hardest of times, people found ways to come together and enjoy a meal. Boiled carrot sandwiches was created from the weird culinary gap left by increasing prices and thinner savings accounts. Like we said, people wanted vegetables that ticked the cheaper and tastier most boxes for them, however, even that was getting tough. Some of the worst stretches of the Great Depression left people with frustrations and creativity alike. Whipping up dishes like this was common, and the boiled carrot sandwich definitely stayed during the time because of its simplicity. Americans love a good sandwich, and they adore an easy-to-cook filling. Boiled carrot sandwiches definitely met most of the criteria, as roasting cheese to create an open-faced sandwich was a popular choice. Suffering the same fate as other dishes on this list, the boiled carrot sandwich eventually died out as economic growth increased in America. Kraut juice. It's just what it sounds like. During the Great Depression, fermented cabbage brine was a go-to pantry item, prized for its versatility and surprising nutritional benefits. It was a byproduct of sauerkraut making, and wasting it was out of the question. Straight down the throat for its purported health benefits as a cooking liquid for soups and stews, or even as a splash to bland foods to add flavor. Basically, it was the Depression-era version of an electrolyte drink, thought to help digestion and keep people going when fresh produce was scarce. But the taste was divisive. You either loved it or learned to tolerate it. Kraut juice had its good points too. It was cheap, it kept forever, and it was surprisingly rich in vitamins and probiotics. It was a lifeline in a jar for families with limited resources. Kraut juice has faded from the household staple, but it hasn't gone away altogether. Some old-school recipes still use it, and occasionally it's sipped as a health tonic. For the people who lived through the Great Depression, Kraut juice wasn't a health trend. It was a necessity. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked, one briny sip at a time. Continuing on the same healthy note, you might have noticed that a lot of people tend to prefer the likes of beans and lentils over double-fried patties with extra cheese. Things like avocado and chickpea tacos were such a hit in the pre-microwave era, but they didn't start being a daily meal until pre-cooked chickpeas and canned ones came around. For about 25 cents a piece, you no longer had to spend hours on the stovetop soaking and cooking chickpeas, and the avocado was again just a matter of how fast you could be with a knife. The tortillas might have been cooked on a griddle or skillet, but all you really needed was a mortar to grind the chickpeas in. All in all, it was a pretty no-fuss manual process that didn't take much out of you or your wallet and left you fuller and healthier. Now, if you think baking a cake without eggs, milk, or butter sounds impossible, think again. During the Dust Bowl, people got creative with their baking. This egg-free, milk-free, and butter-free cake was made with simple ingredients like flour, sugar, and vegetable oil. It was impossible to live without cake even in times of desperation, so people decided to make do without the fancy ingredients. Now, I know eggs, milk, and butter don't sound fancy to us, but these ingredients were a luxury to find during the Dust Bowl days, and even if you did find some, it was never enough to whip up a whole cake. The cake might not have been as rich as its traditional counterparts, but it was a sweet treat that offered a bit of comfort during difficult times. Prune pudding was one of the more niche dishes that were created during the Great Depression. What really was surprising was that prune pudding extended to the upper royalty as well, since even prominent VIPs would also be real low budget with how they eat. Prune pudding became very popular as a result of the efforts made by First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, who would serve prune pudding at White House functions. It stained the White House's culinary track record, sure, but earned massive points with the struggling American people. For being made of such a simple ingredient and some syrups of your choice, it was definitely one of the tastiest and cheapest meals to come home to. I never knew fat could be the unsung hero of the Great Depression. Suet, the solid white fat from the loins or kidneys of sheep and cows, was much more than a pantry staple. It was a survival tool. Suet was once prized for its versatility, being used in cooking, baking, and even non-food uses such as making candles and soap. When resources were scarce and people had to make the most of every morsel, it was the original all-in-one solution. Suet was a game-changer in the kitchen. It gave the dishes of meat pies, puddings, and dumplings richness, which helped to make them hearty enough to stretch a meal for an entire family. During the colder months when energy reserves were important, its high-calorie content made it essential. Suet wasn't just for savory dishes either, with recipes like suet pudding turning this otherwise savory staple into a sweet one. In addition to its utility, suet was available. It was often considered a byproduct by butchers and sold cheaply, so even the most cash-strapped families could afford it. It was also easy to render and store and kept for months when properly handled. Suet has pretty much disappeared from modern kitchens, but it occasionally makes an appearance in traditional recipes. It was more than just fat to those who lived through the Great Depression. It was a lifeline in lard's clothing. We've got one thing straight: meat was scarce during the dust storm era, so jackrabbits became a surprising alternative. These nimble critters were abundant in the wild, and they provided a valuable source of protein. Jackrabbits were often stewed or roasted, and its meat was said to be quite flavorful when prepared correctly. Jackrabbits, those long-eared critters that seemed to hop faster than a speeding bullet, became a potential meal. I'm not sure how they caught them, but I imagine it was a wild chase through a dust storm. Cooking jackrabbit was more of a skill than creativity, and preparing this dinner was a labor of hard work, as it was a lean meat that needed to be tenderized and seasoned well, but when done right, it was totally worth it. Egg drop soup for some royal courts was a show of a chef's skill. In 1930, America, the soup became a beloved soup of the masses who were struggling to make an honest paycheck. Bread from last night and eggs beaten so thoroughly that the preparation itself doubled as a forearm workout resulted in an incredibly rich soup. Sometimes, if a home cook felt particularly fancy, they would have chicken either boiled or shredded in the mix. Using the chicken stock was also a common way to not let anything go to waste, since getting the most bang for your buck out of poultry became a habit of everyone. Most would just have this with eggs and throw in some ginger, chives and olives, or anchovies. We would definitely like to see this make a comeback with a less cost-oriented version that really explores the dish. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Comment down below your thoughts. Was life easier or harder in times when grocery stores didn't exist?